Yay, it's Jodi Day.
Jodi Day. What day is it? It's Jodi Day. It's Jodi.
It's Jodi Day. I excited the dog, apparently. He's barking.
Oh.
I said, yeah, it's Jodi Day. And all of a sudden he starts barking. He knows what's up. He knows.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, the bitch is not dead yet. Yeah.
I'm going to find a new position, a better position for my camera. I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's see. There. That could be good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Sure.
Sort of. I don't know. All right. We'll leave it like this. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Jodi Day, where Nick and I dual stream. You can go watch on my channel, though. The Jodi Arias trial. And we are on, I don't even know what day we are on. Oh, my God. What day are we on? We're on day 5,420.
We are on day 49, part 3. It's still Dr. Janeen DeMarte and the defense desperately trying to undermine her credibility.
Much like Legal Vices, I have a feeling Jodi's going to die before we finish this trial rewatch.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just going on forever. But I'm loving it. I'm still loving it.
Yeah. And this is a good witness. I don't mind her taking up time at all. Compared to the last witness we had.
Yes. Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So this one I really don't. Hello everybody over at the chat. I see 20th Century Fox, Gwendolyn, Erin, Helen. I see
Gwendolyn SS. That's an interesting name.
And look at that. Dave, have you seen any one of these yet?
No, what is that? That seems weird. What is that? Get rid of that. I counted. I have I have 800 watch hours. I need 3,000. So I need 2,200, 2,200 roughly. Which actually, so last night got me some because I was it got me like 300 watch hours last night.
Okay, nice. Yeah. But
I'm not doing it for the money. This is a hobby. This is as sad as that sounds. This is for fun.
Okay.
For me, you well, I don't know. I retired from YouTube, right? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, you retired from YouTube. I haven't. And
go give Nick all the super chats and give me all the watch hours. That's all.
Yeah. Yep. Now, do I do this for the monies? I can't because I mean, if I wish I could get to a level of minimum wage, which I am about maybe a quarter of minimum wage of what I do on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. It's well, I've been having fun doing this, and it's been less stressful now that I'm not trying to like make this a business. It's been much more enjoyable since February, and so I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time watching trials, watching Jodi.
Yeah, I must say, I'm having the time of my life over here. YouTube, streaming on Twitter, on Rumble, and stuff like that because I can't do this in my line of work. Because doing labor law, I have to be this stone-faced, really stoic, all about the rules. Yeah, that wouldn't be a good show if I showed you that part of me.
Yeah. I'm the same in court, which is fun because I even get called out on my spelling mistakes in court. So it's a good time.
Did you get called out when you tried to pronounce names?
I was called out. So for some reason, my computer, I don't know why, every single C was replaced with a K in my Word, in my Word, program. I don't know, but the judge called me out on it. That was great. So now I got to go back and figure out why revoke is spelled with a K in my Word program. I have no idea.
Revoke is spelled with a K.
Revocable. Sorry, revocable. The word revocable is a C.
Yeah. That's a C, yeah.
Yeah. So, but it spelled it with a K, revocable with a K, all the way through every single word. It was great.
But that's just it. Maybe you don't. You haven't. Maybe you don't like the C words.
I don't like the C words. No. See, that's the
No.
thing. That's what I should have told the judge. I don't like the C words.
Do you think he would have gotten the joke?
She would not have, no. Or she would have gotten it and would not have liked it, no.
Judge, are you asking me to use the C words?
That would have been great. Yeah. Damn it, a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, you missed it. Maybe you will get another one. Maybe you will.
That's right.
We can only hope. And when you do, please let it be a streamed trial.
Yeah. Oh, that would be great. I only stream the ones where I do good in.
Yeah. Good choice.
I got it. Okay, that's for another day. But you and Salvador have been talking about streaming one of my trials. I need to get another trial going. That's the problem.
Here's the thing. Most cases kind of get solved before trial. So
yeah, we're all like filing motions and limiting motions for witnesses, motions for experts, all this stuff right before trial, and then everyone gets panicky and they settle. Yeah, and it's like, damn it, I wanted a trial.
Well, we are here about this trial.
We
are here about Jodi.
This case did not settle.
Oh no, it didn't. It didn't. In fact, it's more or less still ongoing in some shape or form, but this is the actual trial. Trial from 2013. When we started this was a 10-year-old trial. Now it is an 11-year-old trial.
Yes, it is. That's great.
But let's see what today brings.
Right? Okay, Dr. DeMarte, we're talking about the MCMI, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if we can get through this. The MCMI ultimately produces a...
What?
Let's see if we can get through this. I just thought that was fun.
I mean, this defense lawyer should by now... no.
Yeah. She's struggling. That was more to herself. That was internal dialogue to herself.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get through this.
Whoops, did I say that out loud?
Yeah, that's exactly what
I'm trying, Judge. I'm trying.
Diagnosis, doesn't it?
Rule out diagnoses, things to consider.
Okay, so things to consider. And they talk about Access 1 and Access 2.
Yes.
And in Access 1, with regard to MCMI, and also what Dr. Samuels found with regard to his other reports, you're aware that he diagnosed Access 1 as post-traumatic stress, right?
Yes.
And he found it to be acute.
Yes.
And you're aware that under Access 1, he has anxiety disorder, none other specified, NOS.
He does where?
Under Access 1.
On what are you referring to?
His report. May I approach?
Oh, so many sidebars. Everyone's scared of this witness. Even
and so under Access 1, he also has anxiety disorder?
Yes.
And under Access 2, you're aware that based on the MCMI, the diagnosis was personality disorder, NOS.
Yes.
So there was no diagnosis for borderline, right?
It was personality NOS, indicating that there was the presence of a personality disorder.
Right. It's not specifically indicating borderline, is it?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Now you conducted your own TSI, didn't you?
Yes.
And you said you hand scored it?
Yes.
So when you hand score it, then you don't get a computer printout, obviously, right?
Correct.
And do you have your hand scores with you today?
Yes.
Can you pull those up, please? Can I have them? I'm gonna mark.
What do you want? You want data?
I want the information that you would get once you score it, so.
You want the scale
scales.
scores? It's only this side of the paper. Yes.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Are we a gang, Dave? Well,
Yes, of course we are. According to Georgia, right?
according to Georgia, yes, we are technically a gang. But we don't answer any questions because if they charge us, I'm getting a lawyer.
I was thinking about that. If I end up getting like charged criminally in Sweden, should I call you?
Nope, I don't do criminal work, and I'm contracted
You
to
know
a union.
somebody, right?
Yeah, I can refer you.
Just Nick storms into the police station.
I'm
Alright.
his
Amazing.
lawyer.
This is your hand scoring, right, of the TSI, part of the TSI scales, right?
Yes.
Which scales are those?
Which scales?
Well, is that all the scales that you look at under the TSI?
Yes.
And you have, part of the worksheet, you show a raw score, right?
Oh, on here?
Yes.
Yes.
And then you also show what the T-score is.
Yes, that's correct.
And the T-score is what you plot into a graph.
Yes.
And the T-score is what we've kind of been talking about this morning, is when it gets plotted into a graph, you're looking at that number, whether or not it's clinically significant.
Yes.
Okay. And this particular TSI test, when did you give it?
August 12th,
Of what year?
2011.
2011? All right, and you gave the TSI 1, right?
Yes.
But at that time, the TSI 2 was available, wasn't it?
Just recently had been put out.
So it was available.
Yes.
And the TSI 2 is the more updated version, isn't it?
Yes.
And
She's
was there a benefit to
dramatically
use
coloring
an
over
outdated
there.
test?
To use an outdated test?
Yes, to use the TSI 1
had-
versus the TSI 2.
There was no benefit. It had just been released.
Okay, so
So there was no benefit to it.
there was no benefit to using the old one.
Right.
Okay, but you still chose to use the old one.
The other one wasn't available to me.
You just said it was released.
It was released, but it wasn't available to me.
So in other words, if you wanted to, you couldn't go and get it?
The agency that I was working at had not purchased it, and it wasn't something, there's a time span as psychologists that we're given to update our test, and given that it was just released, I was well within that time span.
Okay, and so the agency you were working with was Bayless, right?
That's correct.
And let's see, August 12th of 2011, this puts you about a year out after getting your license, right?
Yes.
And so a year out after getting your license, you're conducting this TSI test and you didn't ask Bayless to go and get the updated one?
No,
So you were just content using the one that has been revised, the one that had not been revised?
it had, the other one had just been released.
Right, so you were content using the one that was
Yes, I
not
thought this was
revised?
adequate.
Oh my
All
God,
right.
this is verbal diarrhea.
When you gave the rat and the waist, though, you used the updated versions of those, didn't you?
Yes.
Same thing with the MMPI, you used the updated version?
Yes.
Okay,
Which had been out for several years.
okay, but those were all updated for you.
Yes.
All right, let's look at the clinical scales on the TSI. There were several elevated scales, weren't there?
Yes.
And one of the scales that's elevated is AA. Can you tell us what that means?
Related to anxiety.
Okay, and she was elevated on that, wasn't she?
Yes.
And the clinical elevation on this test is actually at 65, not 75, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so things above 65 is clinically elevated, right?
Yes.
And so clinically elevated was anxious arousal. That's what you were saying relates to anxiety?
Yes.
And you also found that depression was also elevated, right?
Yes.
And depression was elevated to 78. Is that what you got?
Yes.
And we also have DA. What is that?
Can I reference my notes?
Sure, can you too?
That's the avoidance subscale.
I'm sorry, it's the what?
Avoidance subscale?
Okay, defensive avoidance. Does
Yes.
that sound right? All right, and so defensive avoidance, and that's avoiding what? What is that talking about?
Avoidance in general. The TSI doesn't specifically identify a specific trauma, so it's just general avoidance type of behaviors.
Okay, and so under general avoidance type of behaviors, it's elevated at 66, right? Is that what you got?
Yes.
Okay. And then we have DIS. What's that? Do you need to refer to your notes?
Yes, I'm referring to my notes. I should let you know that. Dissociation.
Okay, and so dissociation, that was also elevated, wasn't it?
Yes,
And that was elevated to 73.
correct.
And then we also have SC. What's that? And if, are you
I'm referring to my notes. Sexual concerns.
All right, and that was elevated to 80, right?
Yes.
And then we have DSB.
No,
just,
no, I mean,
do you know what that is?
It's another sexual scale.
Okay, and that was elevated, wasn't it?
Yes,
And we also have ISR. Can you tell us what that is?
it's related to identity.
Okay, impaired self-reference?
Yes,
Okay, so does that have to do with when somebody does not view themselves in a positive manner?
impaired self-reference is self-concept, kind of related to the idea that I was speaking about yesterday.
Okay, so you'd agree that it also can mean low self-image, right?
It's more related to self-concept.
So not related at
So
all to
identity.
self-image.
There's some overlap.
Okay, and so there's some overlap with self-image and self-esteem, right?
Yes,
And
She
this one
is
was also
trying,
elevated
that's
to
right.
83, wasn't it?
yes,
And the elevation of that means that there is a impaired self-reference, right?
yes,
Or that she has a lower self-image or lower self-esteem. Those overlapping ideas, right?
and identity confusion.
So you're saying,
Self-concept and identity.
so impaired self-reference also has to do with identity.
Yes,
Okay.
which is self-concept.
All right. And the scale, when it goes up to 83, as high as that, it doesn't tell you identity or self-image, right?
Correct. It doesn't parse it apart.
Okay.
Well, technically, Jodi has no self-esteem because she adapts to the current boyfriend.
Yeah, it's very weird. She doesn't know who she is.
All right.
Oh my
And one of
God,
these on here, we also have
yeah,
IE.
right.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah, Amy.
I'll reference my notes.
Sure.
Intrusive experiences.
And do you have that on your scales there?
Do I have what?
The IE, is it showing up there?
As an item? Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. And what's the number that you get on that?
61 is a T.
Okay. Is the T score, right?
Yes.
All right. And so that falls just below clinically significant, doesn't it?
Yes, it falls below.
Okay. And so based on the work that you told us about that you've done with some of domestic violence women who've suffered from domestic violence, you'd be aware then that a lot of times battered women suffer from low self-image, don't they?
Yes.
And yesterday you talked to us about whether or not you personally believed Jodi exhibited any behavior of low self-image, and you said no, right?
Right.
But this test result speaks differently, doesn't it?
No.
Well, it doesn't. You just agreed with me that it doesn't parse it out, right? With regard to the impaired self-reference.
Right. It refers to both.
Okay. One of the other scales on this TSI is AI. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
What's
yes.
that?
No, refer to my notes. It's anger irritability.
All right. And what's the T-score on that one?
43.
All right. And 43, that's not clinically significant, is it?
That's correct.
Yesterday, you talked to us about Jodi's floating profile being one that is prone to violent outbursts or anger, right?
You're confusing two terms.
Violent outbursts, you said, right?
You're confusing floating profile with that interpretation.
Okay. Well, let's not talk about floating profile for a second.
Okay.
One of the things that you said with regard to Jodi's personality traits is that there would be a tendency for violent outbursts, right?
Yes.
Okay. And but here, when we're talking on the TSI scale with anger and irritability, she falls below clinically significant, right?
That's correct.
And when you hand score these, do you get the composite scales?
That's what you're looking at, just the T scales.
Okay. Well, do you get also the summary scales? I'm talking about summary scales.
This is all that you get.
Okay, so you didn't do anything with regard to the summary scales groups. There's three groups that it's grouped into three different groups.
Not in the original TSI.
Okay, so you didn't do that then.
It's not part of the scoring.
TSI summary scales are not part of the scoring?
Well, you're confusing terms again. So what's on this, what you're looking at there is everything that's included in the scoring.
Okay, so that's, I don't think I'm confusing anything. I'm asking you about summary scales. Do you not have any TSI summary scales?
She asked it, but I don't think I. Overall, to me, it's.
If you're referring, are you referring to the summed raw scores?
No,
That would be a summary scale. So that's not what you're referring to.
no, I'm talking about the summary scales of trauma, self, and dysphoria. Do you have those?
No,
Okay, so you didn't do those.
those aren't part of the scoring.
Okay. So then you don't have any significance with regard to the scales, the summary of trauma, the summary of self, and the summary of dysphoria, right?
It's not part of the scoring.
Oh, the defense attorney is combining the numbers of, but that's not how these scorings goes. You can't just add up the three you deem are important.
Yes. That's what she's trying to do. I don't know if she's confused or if she's trying to confuse the witness. But if she's trying to confuse the witness, she's not doing a very good job. It sounds
No.
more like she's confused.
Yeah, but well, she is trying to confuse the witness, but the witness, oh, what are you doing? You're doing wrong. Stop doing wrong, attorney. What's her face?
Yeah, this witness is very good. She's young. Remember, we commented about how young she is and fairly inexperienced she is compared to other witnesses that we've seen. But she's been on the stand before, and she's confident in her position.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely knows what she's doing up there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, I wonder if my wife took the last beer.
And the TSI or trauma test, that is a test that can indicate
that one of
PTSD,
mine?
right?
It can indicate
Thank you.
Because
PTSD.
trauma is a part of PTSD.
Yes.
And based on these test scores, we're seeing a elevated anxiety, right?
Yes.
And elevated depression, right?
Yes.
And elevated defensive avoidance.
Yes.
And so based on those items, don't those items also speak to PTSD?
Those are symptoms that can be seen in PTSD and in personality disorders.
So they can be seen in PTSD?
Yes, they can.
All right. So you talked to us a little bit about your experience with domestic violence, right?
Yes.
And that some of these patients that have come into you since you were training in 2004 and then after you've been licensed, that these patients have had issues with domestic violence in their lives, right?
Yes.
During this time that you're seeing these people, you're not, I guess there's one part in your CV where you specifically talk for 2 months that you're interviewing domestic violence women, right? Women who suffered from domestic violence, right?
Which aspect of the CV are you talking about?
I'm talking about the 2 months that you spent doing the unstructured interviews.
Those were for perpetrators.
Those
were
are perpetrators.
Yes, I think what you're referring to is back to research that was done at Michigan State University.
Okay. And so, all right, so let's talk, the research that you did, that's when you're doing interviews of women who had been some type of domestic violence, right?
Yes,
Okay. And then you spent 2 months with perpetrators.
that would be another instance.
Yes, right? Okay. And other than that, in your CV, you don't specifically talk about assessing domestic violence, right?
Correct.
And during these times when you're either doing research or other than the 2 months that you spent with batterers, you're not assessing domestic violence relationships, right?
That's incorrect.
So you're assessing domestic violence relationships?
Frequently.
And what are you doing to assess them?
It's several times when people come into me either for therapy or for evaluation. Part of my job is to determine whether they've been exposed to domestic violence, and secondly, whether it's actually had a negative impact on them or not.
Okay, so you're talking to them, and how is it that you're assessing them for this?
By asking them questions related to domestic violence and related symptoms, in addition to all the other questions that I ask about their life.
Okay, and what research is it that you rely on to form the knowledge to make assessments regarding domestic violence relationships?
Can you say that again?
Sure. What research is it that you rely on to form the knowledge to assess domestic violence relationships?
If you're talking about a specific diagnosis, or are you talking about whether it's present or not?
I'm talking about the research that you rely on to form the knowledge to ask these people about their domestic violence situations and to ultimately form an opinion about what type of relationship they're in.
Sure, I rely on Lenore Walker's research. There's a number of different researchers out there that talk about domestic violence and how it causes.
Besides Lenore Walker, who else do you rely on?
There's no particular author off the top of my head that I tend to turn to all the time in terms of domestic violence specifically.
Is it
So
just
can you name at least
me?
one other than Lenore Walker?
Not off the top of my head.
So we have two learned individuals that seem to be talking about two different things and going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at the exact same time, we have a child drawing at the table, just do.
Yeah.
And they're talking about how how battered she was and how she was subject to domestic violence and how she suffers from PTSD, and she's just coloring away. It's not a good look.
No, I mean, hello, Flux, and thank you for the Flux raid. Yay.
Fluxians,
hello. Yeah, I mean, you would imagine that that Jodi would have a bigger reaction to this discussion. Instead, she's just there disassociating herself.
Yeah, she's just, I don't know if that's part of the thing, the diagnosis. I don't know. Very weird. She's just sitting there coloring away. You could see her erase stuff and brush off the the eraser marks, and I don't know, just very weird.
I'm going to play on here, then I'm going to refill my coffee.
Sounds good.
All right, and so Lenore Walker, let's see. That's what you talked about yesterday, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us, okay, so are there any books that you've read recently with regard to domestic violence that you rely on?
Recently,
Yes.
I referred back to Lenore's recent book, and I think it was in 2009 was when it was last published as a 3rd edition.
Okay, so other than Lenore Walker, any other books that you've read with regard to specialties in domestic violence?
Yes.
What are those?
I don't have the titles off the top of my head.
Okay, so it's not something that you know off the top of your head.
Correct.
And what about journals? Do you
Yes.
receive any journals with regard to domestic violence?
I don't receive any journals because I have access to them online.
Okay, so which ones do you access online that are specifically made for domestic violence?
I access journals. Journal articles. I don't access specific journals. So if there's a patient that I'm seeing that is suffering with a particular disorder or problem, I'll look up research associated with that and just using a broad database.
So then are you telling me that regularly speaking, you don't keep up with domestic violence and the new research in the field by regularly reading domestic violence journals, the articles contained in these special journals?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So you do then regularly keep up with domestic violence journals?
You're talking about journals and I'm talking about research articles. Those are very different things.
Well, I'm talking about the articles contained in the journals.
Right. So I read articles
Oh
frequently.
my God.
Right, okay. So I understand that you read articles frequently. What I'm talking about is, are you reading articles frequently that are contained and written especially for domestic violence?
Yes, I don't know the exact journals because as I'm reading the article, I don't look up and reference what journal this specifically came from. I just
Okay.
know it's peer reviewed.
Okay, can you give us any of the names of the articles that you've read recently?
I don't commit those to memory.
Okay, so when was the last time you read one of these?
Last week,
Okay, and you don't remember the name of it?
I don't commit these things to memory. I have a full patient load that I see on a weekly basis. That's not something that's important to me to keep the title of it.
Okay, and you don't remember the journal that you got it from?
I didn't get it from a journal. Again, I got it from a broad database.
Right. But ultimately, they're published in a journal, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay, and you don't
I mean, there's databases with the articles. We have those in law, in different aspects.
Yeah,
Then,
she knows what she's talking about.
yeah.
I mean, the attorney knows what this is, right? She's
Yeah.
she's being intentionally stupid.
Yeah. This is the song and dance routine that Dave was talking about in the courtroom.
remember the name of the journal that this article that you read last week was published in.
I did not look at the journal.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, you told us yesterday that in your experience and your knowledge, you don't believe that Jodi is a battered woman, right?
I believe there's inconsistencies in her report.
You told us yesterday, that's not what I asked you. You told us yesterday that based on your knowledge and experience, you don't believe that Jodi fits a battered woman, right?
Battered women syndrome, correct.
Okay. And you relied on, when you were talking about that with us yesterday, you relied on work that's been done by Lenore Walker, right?
That's correct.
And that's something that we just talked about today, Lenore Walker.
Correct.
And the work that you relied on with regard to Lenore Walker, she first published articles when? Do you remember her first book?
I believe it was back in 70s,
79?
71, sometime in the 70s.
Okay. And so if you're familiar with domestic violence, and then you would also be familiar with the fact that there had been many revisions and additional research done after Lenore Walker published her book, right?
The original book, yes.
Okay.
It's very controversial.
Yes, and in fact, there's been lots of other research done with regard to domestic violence and battered women since then, hasn't there?
Yes.
The book that we're talking about being published by Lenore Walker, that's where you get these 6 criteria from, right?
Yes.
And that's the one that we're talking about being published in the 70s, right?
No.
She came out with the 6 criteria back then, didn't she?
No.
No? You think she came out with it later than that?
In the book, they indicated that because there's been so much research that's done on this topic, that they've formulated new criteria to capture, that there's now some sort of criteria to capture what is battered women syndrome. For many years, there was no criteria.
So wait, so you're testifying
It's
that
still
there
a
is
discredited
that
science.
Lenore Walker would agree.
Battered woman syndrome is still discredited now, 11 years later.
Yeah.
That there is specific criteria to profile a battered woman. Is that what you're saying?
No. You're
Okay, that's
changing my
what
words.
Okay, then tell me what you're saying. There is criteria or no?
There's criteria that's listed in her book that identify the presence of battered women syndrome
Okay.
that she identifies. Again, this is not the DSM. This is just a culmination of research that's come with this criteria.
And yesterday you talked specifically about 6 criteria, right?
Yes.
And those 6 criteria, you're telling me that was not published in her original book.
I'm not aware if it was. I know that in her most updated book, that's what was published and it relied on research that was more recent.
Her most updated book publishes the same 6 criteria. Is that what you're saying?
No, I just said to you that I'm not aware if it was published before. The way that it's written in this book indicates that it's based on new research
Right.
and that this is new criteria.
Okay, so the new criteria based on the new research, and new research done by other people, right?
By a number of people.
Right. Do you know who Marianne Dutton is?
Yes, I've heard of that.
Who's Marianne Dutton?
I believe a researcher.
Right, and tell us what her research has shown.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, you know that she's a leading researcher in battered women syndrome, right?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, well, then perhaps you know that she has done updated research with regard to battered women syndrome, right?
It sounds like you have some information about that.
Do you know that?
I'm not aware of her name specifically. As I highlighted earlier, I don't commit that to memory.
Okay, well then maybe do you commit to memory that the updated research with regard to battered women syndrome actually takes a global view at it now? Are you aware of that?
What do you mean by global view?
Well, that it shows that the more likely diagnosis for battered women syndrome is PTSD. Are you aware of that?
I'm very aware that PTSD and battered women syndrome have been used together. Yes.
Okay, and are you aware then that with the updated research, even Lenore Walker isn't using those 6 criteria anymore? Are you aware of that?
Those 6 criteria include PTSD.
Are you aware that Lenore Walker does not even use those 6 criteria anymore?
That seems inaccurate.
So you're
based
not
on the
aware of that?
criteria. That doesn't sound accurate.
Okay, so you disagree then?
Yes.
And you've never met Lenore Walker, have you?
No.
Okay.
That's an interesting statement from the defense attorney, because if she claims that Lenore Walker isn't using those, why isn't she showing that? Is that a?
You're right.
This is a fishing expedition.
Yeah, I
And-
wonder. I mean, I know she paid to talk to this witness ahead of time, so maybe she got some glimpses into some attacks that she wants to present.
Yeah.
I just don't think she's doing a very good job. We'll see where it goes, I guess.
No, here's the thing with this Lenore Walker research. Now, the defense has propositioned a theory that Lenore Walker has changed her mind. Can they really do that without? Because then it would be hearsay, wouldn't it?
No, you can impeach with hearsay. You can use it because you're not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted. So if you're using it to challenge somebody's on the stand, you could do that.
Yeah, but if you challenge with a statement of fact, don't you have to show that fact?
No, especially because this is an expert that's able to offer opinion. You could say, if I was to tell you X, Y, and Z, how would that change your testimony? You know, you could do things like that because this is an expert. So that's why hearsay is even more so admitted and things like that, because even experts can use hearsay when developing their opinion. I know it's really weird, but there's looser rules with experts.
That goes through, it says battered person syndrome is classified as an ICD-9 code, blah, 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 but it's not in the DSM-5 posted to clarify that it is a legitimate diagnosis. Okay.
I don't know. Well, it's okay. Maybe it's a legitimate diagnosis, but it's not.
It's a
accepted by
contested.
the
It's
courts.
it's the contested one.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's battered person syndrome, not a battered woman syndrome.
Okay.
According to Ghostly, I have no clue. No clue whatsoever.
Since you seem to be familiar with her work then, are you familiar that Lenore Walker, actually, her updated research takes a trauma-informed approach rather than using the 6 criteria?
No, I was not aware of that.
But yet, not being aware of this information, you don't consider yourself an expert in domestic violence, do you?
I'm an expert as a clinical psychologist.
Well, clinical psychologist is kind of a big general area, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, so you're an expert in clinical psychology?
Yes.
Okay, and so, but you don't consider yourself an expert in domestic violence, do you?
Had a lot of experience in domestic violence and working with people with domestic violence. It depends on how you define expert.
Do you define yourself as an expert of domestic violence?
I would not call myself an expert in domestic violence specifically.
Okay, so you are not an expert in domestic violence according to you.
I have a lot of experience with it, but I wouldn't put that term on because I think it's an important term.
So
It's
you
very
would-
specific, right?
So
I
you would not characterize yourself as an expert in domestic violence?
Specifically, yes.
Okay. In fact, part of what you talked to us yesterday is is the fact that your belief that just because a woman does not go see a doctor if her husband beats her, or if she doesn't call the police because her husband hits her, somehow to you, that is a data point that is going to be suggestive that maybe it didn't happen, right?
It's a data point. Yes.
That to you, in this particular case, it suggested to you that it didn't happen, right?
Yes, and if it was there, it would suggest that it did happen.
So with battered women, based on your experience, you're expecting battered women to report then, right?
No, not all the time.
Well, then you're aware that they minimize, right?
Yes.
You're aware that they oftentimes don't report.
Yes, I am.
And you're aware that oftentimes they don't call the police when they're hit by their loved ones.
I am aware of that.
And you're aware that they don't go to the doctor when they're hurt by their loved ones.
Yes.
Depends on the injury, because if you claim that you have severely sliced feet due to being dragged over glass, and then 3 weeks later you are attending a ballet class for a common role, then you might not actually have had that injury. Referring
True.
back to the Deb V. Hood case.
True. Yeah, definitely.
You talked a little bit about yesterday about the fight or flight syndrome, right?
Yes.
Okay. And being a psychologist, you know about the brain, right?
Correct.
And that's what you study, right?
Correct.
The fight or flight syndrome, it causes a physiological response, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's something that we can't control necessarily,
Yes.
right? And you talked, just one second.
I mean,
This is
what she has to work with.
All
All right, we'll take the recess a little early and we'll start early. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be back at 1:20,
But that was it?
1:20
That was quick.
from lunch.
I thought we had like another hour and a half of this woman.
Yeah, we have, but we are still on day 49. Let's go over to day 50.
Oh, okay.
So we have.
By the way, everyone needs to go check out Vielhammer Media. Vielhammer Media. Go watch his stuff. He does excellent work with remastering the audio for these trials. He's got a ton of trials. He's got other things. He's also been doing them live, remastering the trial, the audio live. So go check him out. Give him a sub.
Yep. And if let's see here. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Well, the link is in the description. At least it should be in the description on each of our streams.
Yes. Hopefully.
And that is the name if you want to look it up yourself. Vielhammer Media.
Yep.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Dr. DeMarte, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes.
You may continue with cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. DeMarte. Let's talk about some of the things that you had to say with fight versus flight, okay?
Okay.
You told us that when a person is in a fight versus flight episode, that it's a physiological response, right?
There is a physiological response that occurs.
And it's something, because it's a physiological response, that means that it has something to do with our bodies, right?
Correct.
And that's not something we can help.
It's a response to fear. Yes, it happens automatically.
Okay. So we can't help what our body does, right?
Correct.
And when we talk about what our body does, the physiological response has an effect on our brains, right?
Yes,
And you're familiar with the part of the brain called the hippocampus?
I am.
And part of what the hippocampus does is dealing with short-term memories, right?
I wouldn't use those words.
Okay, what would you use?
What the hippocampus does is it encodes information from the short-term memory to long-term memory. As I described it before, I think about it as a hallway.
Okay, and so the short-term memories are in the hippocampus, and at some point they have to be encoded to the other parts of the brain to form long-term memories, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so during this fight versus flight type of response, the hippocampus, there's neurotransmitters that are released in our brains, right?
Correct.
And those neurotransmitters are things like adrenaline,
Yes.
norepinephrine,
Yes.
and is it dopamine is the other one?
Dopamine, cortisol is also released.
Okay, and so all those things get released into our brain, right? When we
Yes.
go into a fight or flight situation.
Yes.
And what happens is it then floods the hippocampus, doesn't it?
Yes.
Those neurotransmitters,
Yes.
right? And so when the hippocampus is flooded with those neurotransmitters, it ultimately causes a problem with it forming or keeping those short-term memories to be able to encode them to other parts of the brain, doesn't it?
There's
You
some
were just
interference.
Some
I was
interference.
typing out an
Okay,
answer.
meaning that it causes a problem with taking those short-term memories and encoding them into long-term memories, right?
Yes, it can cause some problems.
Right. So in other words, these short-term memories are not going to always get into our long-term memory, right?
Not all of them.
Okay. And sometimes not any of them during this period of time, right?
That's not typical.
It happens, doesn't it?
That's not typical.
I understand that you're saying it's not typical, but it happens, right?
Anything's possible, but it's not probable.
Okay. So what you're saying then is that when the hippocampus is flooded,
She needs
sometimes
to
it can
control
have
this
some
witness
memories and
more.
sometimes it may not.
Yeah.
Usually there's some memory that's there.
Okay. And there's some memory you're saying that then can be encoded for long-term memories,
Yes.
despite all the neurotransmitters that have flooded the hippocampus.
Right. It causes interference.
Right. Okay. So when a person goes into this fight or flight response, the higher brain activity starts to is affected, isn't it?
Are you referring to executive functions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And that's on purpose, isn't it? That's the way we're created.
Can you restate that question in a different way?
No, I mean,
God
that's the
created
way that
us
the brain
so
is meant
that-
to work, right?
What's the way that the brain's meant to work?
The executive functions are limited so that we can go into survival mode.
So if I understand your question, you're saying in a fight or flight mode, the reason why they go into a limited ability is so that we can survive. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, it goes to survival. It helps us survive, right? So that basically we go into a specific type of mode so that way the only focus of the body and the brain is to survive.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And just because some of the executive functions of our brains are shut down, it doesn't make a person into a walking idiot, right?
That's correct.
They're able to function, aren't they?
Depends on how you're defining function.
Well, they're able to continue walking around.
Yes, gross motor movement is continued to be seen.
All right. And they're able to defend themselves, aren't they?
And what do you mean by defend themselves?
Survive.
They're able to survive if it's successful.
Yes. They're able to do that, right?
If it's successful,
Well, they're able to attempt to survive, right?
attempt to survive, yes.
Okay. And by attempting to survive, they're able to attempt to defend themselves.
Objection, yes. Court's ruling. Approachable.
Ooh, and
Ooh, court
That
ruling. See,
was
we
what-
don't have
that-
the sidebars.
yeah, that was what he was waiting for, because he
Yeah.
hadn't had an objection for quite some time, just on day 49 and here.
I wonder what the court's ruling is. That she can't hypothesize as to whether or not Jodi was experiencing these symptoms at the moment she unalived Travis. I bet is where the court's ruling was.
All right. So when we go into this fight or flight mode, right? The whole point is to survive.
That's correct.
Okay. And so when that means that the ability that we still as humans have.
Yes, I have the list. I was just looking at it. Yesterday was Friday. Yes, I have your list. I have all your emails, and I'm going to be sending those out. Damn it, that required a super chat. I have the list yesterday. I was like, I got to send these out. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Red CM. And Dave, you're a naughty boy.
I know. I'm horrible with this. Just ask the people when. No, don't ask. I'm getting them out. I have the list. I have all your emails. I'm getting them out. Damn it. Okay. Putting it on my
Thank you.
calendar for Monday.
Yeah. Write it down, Dave, so you don't forget it.
Mhm.
Don't go into fight or flight mode. Don't go stabby.
I'm
Don't go
flighting.
stabby. Don't go all stabby.
Send out Jodi mugs. 9 a.m. Monday morning. All right. It's in the calendar. It exists in my world now.
Yep.
Okay.
The ability to defend ourselves, right?
If that's the mechanism that's being used, there's fight or flight.
Right. So if flight isn't going to work and the person has to stay in fight, that's the point of this whole mode within our brains to be able to attempt to defend ourselves, right?
What typically happens is that they engage in either fight or flight.
Right. I know that. But what I'm saying is that when we're talking about if we're not going to fight, if there's no flight, then we're talking about fight. So if we're talking about fight, that means that our brains are intended so that we can attempt.
I mean, it's fight or flight. If you
Yes.
are a flight person, then you don't fight. Then you try to run no matter what. You just don't realize, oh no, a wall. Now I need to fight. No, it often then it's shutdown time, more or less. You don't go from flight to fight, typically. I mean, we all hear about don't put a wolf up against a wall or up against a cliff, because then that wolf will start to fight. Yeah, but that's not a human. We don't function as wolves.
time to defend ourselves,
don't?
right?
Yes.
Okay.
I said we don't.
When the hippocampus gets flooded with these neurotransmitters, at some point, these neurotransmitters are going to recede from the brain and kind of go away after a while, right? Go back to normal levels.
Yes.
And when that happens, the hippocampus, you're not telling us that the hippocampus is destroyed, right?
When they go back to normal?
Yeah, once the neurotransmitters kind of recede and your brain starts to function in a normal sense again, the hippocampus is generally still intact, right?
What I explained before was that if there's prolonged exposure, that you can see damage, but typically when it does drop to normative levels, you don't see continued damage.
Okay, so on direct, you talked about seeing atrophy, right?
Yes.
And so you're saying that when the hippocampus is under prolonged levels of these neurotransmitters, then you start to see atrophy?
That it's possible to see atrophy.
And is that something that happens a lot?
No.
Okay, and when the hippocampus atrophies, that's when people tend to have long-term memory problems, right?
That's when they have difficulty through the encoding process, taking new information and encoding it into long-term memory.
All right, and when you talk about atrophy, that's something that we see in diseases like, diseases that cause memory issues, like Alzheimer's, right?
That's one area.
Okay, and with atrophy, though, I know that you noted on direct that you didn't notice any type of atrophy issues with Miss Arias's hippocampus, right? You didn't see any evidence of that?
I certainly did not examine her hippocampus. I don't have the ability to do that. What I said was that I did not see any continued memory problems that would be suggestive of an atrophied hippocampus.
All right, so you're not suggesting that her hippocampus was somehow atrophied, right?
Right, I did not examine her hippocampus.
And when the
Did your expert examine her hippocampus? Defense attorney, did you order x-rays?
It sounds so
Defense
dirty
attorney?
when you say it like that.
Defense attorney, did you examine the spot?
campus is flooded with these neurotransmitters and these short-term memories then aren't encoded into the long-term memory, that's not something that these memories are ever going to come back, right? Because they were never encoded.
There may be some memories that will never come back.
I'm speaking specifically of memories, short-term memories that never get encoded to long-term memories. So if they're never encoded, there's nothing there for the person to retrieve. Don't you agree?
I understood your question.
Do you agree with that?
Some of those memories, yes, I agree with that.
You're saying some of those memories. What I'm asking, though, is that if we have a group of memories, for the sake of argument, let's label them A, B, and C. A, B, and C get into the hippocampus as short-term memories. The hippocampus is then flooded with neurotransmitters. A, B, and C memories don't get encoded to the brain as long-term memories. Right? Are you understanding so far?
I think you're using different language than I am. You're using an all or nothing, and I'm saying that there's interference that occurs.
I'm not using all or nothing. I'm specifically speaking of specific memories, labeling them A, B, and C. If they are not encoded into long-term memory, we're not going to ever get the memories of A, B, and C back, right?
Right, if those memories were not encoded, correct.
Okay, all right. And you talked about Ms. Arias deleting photos, right?
Yes.
But you certainly didn't watch the testimony in this trial, right?
No.
And so you don't have any information about who deleted these photos, right?
Right, well, it was in the police records.
You think it was in the police record that Ms. Arias deleted the photos?
Well, that there was photos that were deleted.
Right, but on direct, you talked about the photos that were deleted by Ms. Arias. I'm asking you, where did that information come from?
What I just highlighted, that on the police records, that there were photos that were deleted.
Yes, but in the police records, it doesn't say that Ms. Arias deleted the photos, does it?
Her specifically, I don't recall.
Okay, so on direct, then you're assuming that Ms. Arias deleted the photos?
Yes,
Okay, so it's just an assumption on your part.
based on the evidence that I had, the records that I had.
But there are no records that actually say she deleted the photos.
Just that the photos were deleted.
Okay, and you don't know when these photos were deleted, right?
They were deleted when they were found.
Right, but you don't know if they were deleted before the attack or after Mr. Alexander attacks her.
Objection. Those facts not in evidence, i.e. Mr. Alexander attacked her.
Those facts are in evidence.
As to that objection, rephrase.
You don't know when these photos were deleted, whether it was before Mr. Alexander jumped out of the shower at Miss Arias, right?
Objection. It's in fact not at all.
It-
Then he jumped out of her.
It was testified to.
By whom? Yeah, Miss Jodi. By Jodi.
Let me answer.
Can you ask that again?
Sure. You don't know if these photos were deleted before Mr. Alexander got out of the shower and went after Miss Arias, right?
Again, objection. You don't know if he went after her. That's her testimony.
Yeah, I mean, Jodi testified to it, but actual evidence of it are non-existent. she could put it out as a hypothetical. But yeah, skip ahead.
May continue.
Dr. DeMarte, what I'm trying to ask you is whether or not you have any knowledge that these photos that were deleted, if they were deleted before Mr. Alexander came out of the shower and went after Miss Arias.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are directed to recall the evidence you heard during this trial. May continue.
According to the records, the photos that were deleted were those of him in the shower, and that would suggest that it was after the killing.
Okay, and there was also other photos on there as well, too?
I'm aware of that.
That backfired. Photos of him was in the shower, so the deletion of the photos suggests it was after the killing.
Oh my God. I've been muted this whole time. These are not well-crafted questions, is what I was trying to say.
No. And it opened because defense attorney already knows that this witness is combative. She will go way beyond the question to answer.
Great Success wants to know what photos is she talking about. Nick, do you want to answer?
It's the photos of Mr. Alexander in the shower and the photo of Miss Arias dragging Mr. Alexander's dead body back to the bathroom and stuff like that.
She took pictures in the act. Now, I don't think she did it on purpose, but she took pictures in the act.
Yeah.
And then left the camera behind.
Yeah. Tried to delete pictures, but left the camera and the card. I mean, it's so... it's still mind-boggling that she chose to put the camera in the laundry. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
With the memory card in, she threw it in the wash and thought that that was going to destroy the evidence. Why not take it with you? Just take it with you.
She took most of everything else with her, but not
She
the
took
camera.
She took the knife. She took the gun. She didn't take the camera. The evidence that she did it. Oh, there was also some. Well, let's just say we see all of Jodi's holes on the camera as well, on the photographs.
Yeah, and I have specific members-only emojis of the 3-hole wonder. Do you have those, Dave?
No, I decided against the emoji thing. I thought it was a little passe.
You will get there. You will get there.
Go give me some watch hours. If you're watching this right now, we're dual streaming this, and there's a link at the top of Nick's chat. You can go over and give me some watch hours.
Yeah. Dave is under 1,000 watch hours. He needs to get to 3,000 watch hours.
Yes.
Okay, and the photos that Mr. Alexander took of Miss Arias, right?
Yes.
And those photos were taken earlier in the day.
Yes.
And you don't have any knowledge as to when those photos were deleted, right?
That's correct.
And you don't have any knowledge as to how many total photos were taken, right?
That's correct.
So you don't know which ones might have been taken and deleted and some were kept, right?
Say that again.
You don't know which photos might have been deleted before Mr. Alexander came out of the shower, or whether or not they were deleted afterwards, which ones were deleted, and then some might have been deleted and then retaken, more taken.
Well, based on time, the photos of him in the shower were the last photos, and I know those were deleted.
Deleted upon getting the camera, right? When police received the camera.
Yes.
And the photos...
This isn't going away.
You're aware that Miss Arias is a photographer, right?
Yes.
And she liked to take photos?
Yes.
And she did it quite a bit, didn't
Yes.
she? In fact, she's taken photos for weddings.
Yes, I heard her say that
You heard her say that?
in the police interrogation.
Okay. And so you know then that she is familiar with cameras, right?
Yes,
And would be familiar with digital cameras.
presumably.
Okay. So somebody who's familiar with these things wouldn't be such a difficult thing to delete photos if they're familiar with the item, right?
Sustained.
Okay. So you were asked questions about organization and planning, right?
Correct.
And you were asked these questions talking about after Mr. Alexander was killed, right?
Correct.
You talked about the fact that the scene seemed to be somewhat cleaned up. There was some cleaning?
According to the police records.
All right. And you saw the photos, didn't you?
Yes.
And you talked about the fact that that there was no weapon at the scene, right? Found?
Correct.
Okay. But in the photos, you can see that whatever cleaning that may or may not have been done, the person didn't do a good job, right?
That's my recommendation. 702, 703.
It doesn't take an expert.
Approach.
A lot of expert battles here. This is a gigantic courtroom, by the way. This courtroom is too big.
Hmm.
Yeah, 22. Well, I think it's gonna be about 2,000 watch hours when I'm done with today.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at. It's okay. I want to be monetized only so I can redirect to people and so you guys can get your emojis. That's all I'm really worried about.
Good choice. Good choice. Well, so you do want members because, or do you just want to create those as non-member only emojis?
No, they're members only emojis. I don't know how to create now. Can I create non-member emojis?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure
I have to
either.
look into that.
I just
I'm
want my
more-
3-hole wonder back. That's all. For you guys.
So you're familiar with. All right, so you're familiar with the photos taken of the scene, right?
Yes.
And in seeing those photos of the scene, you can tell that the scene certainly wasn't cleaned completely, was it?
It was not cleaned completely.
Okay, and there was a lot of evidence or blood left at the scene, wasn't there?
The photos that I saw was that there was a lot of blood on the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that. And I saw that there was some blood on the sink. And I saw that there was very little blood surrounding Mr. Alexander
In the shower.
in the shower.
Okay, but there was blood on the bathroom floor and things of that nature, right?
The photos that I saw were, again, the sink and the carpet.
Okay, so you didn't see all the photos then?
I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know if there's others.
Okay, so you don't know if you saw them all, is what you're saying?
I just told you the ones I saw.
Okay, so you saw 3?
I saw several of Mr. Alexander.
Okay, all right. And we're talking about executive function versus lower function when we're talking about the brain, right? When we're talking about being in fight or flight mode, okay?
Okay.
We talk about that the executive function shuts down,
Yes.
right? So when the executive function shuts down, you already told me that the person doesn't mean that the person is like a walking idiot, right? They're able to have gross motor skills.
That's correct.
Okay, and that would mean somebody who is familiar with doing certain things would be able to do them still, right?
If it's something that they do frequently, yes.
Okay, and so when we're talking then about somebody who's familiar with using a camera, deleting photos would be something. If they do that frequently, then that would be something that they would be able to do, right?
That's different from choosing photos to delete. Which photos to delete?
Well, okay, so now, what if they were all deleted?
If they're familiar with that camera, then it's possible that it would be considered a gross motor movement.
Okay. And then that would be something that someone can do in fight or flight, right?
If they going back to deleting every photo on there,
Yes.
it's possible.
Okay. And in talking about the organization and the planning that supposedly went on after Mr. Alexander had been killed, you're aware that the camera with all of the photos were actually found in the house in the washer, right?
Yes.
And the camera that had all these photos of Miss Arias and Mr. Alexander on it was intact in the washer, wasn't it?
My understanding is that the photos were deleted and that it gave the appearance that it had gone through a cycle. So I don't know if it was intact.
Well, intact meaning that the camera was still in one piece, right?
After being ran through the washing machine?
Well, you don't know that it was run through the washing machine, do you?
I don't know definitively.
No, you don't. So what I'm asking you is if the camera itself was in
No,
one
you
piece. Do you know
don't.
this or no?
I believe so.
Okay. And the camera had in it, you're aware that it had the SD card, right?
Would that be the card that holds the memory card?
Yes, the memory card.
Yes.
And the memory card, you're aware, wasn't destroyed in any way, was it?
I don't know if it was destroyed.
Okay. And so you didn't follow up to find out if these photos, if the SD card or the memory card, if it was.
Why would she check that? She's there as a clinical psychologist. Why would
I
she?
know.
This is about physical evidence. Why would she? Now the
Why?
prosecutor.
How is this helping, though? That's the thing. How is
Yeah.
this helping?
It isn't, in my humble.
All you doing is reinforcing the fact that she took pictures before and accidentally during and then left it behind.
Yeah.
You don't have any knowledge about that?
I just know they were deleted. I
Okay.
don't know if it was destroyed.
Okay, so when you reviewed the police report, that fact wasn't important for you to remember?
Was it not important? I didn't see that in there, that it was destroyed or not.
Okay, so you didn't see in the police report then that the SD card was pulled out of the camera and it was used by the police to pull these photographs off?
I knew that they had to get it off somehow, but I'm not knowledgeable about cameras in particular and how that process would work.
She was so
But
panicky
on
at
direct,
the
it was
time.
important to you to note that the bathroom that someone had poured water on the floor, attempted to clean, right? That was important to you?
That was important to me.
And that was something that you retained in your memory when reading the police reports, right?
Right.
Okay, but it's not important to you when you're talking about organization and planning to note that this camera that has all the evidence of Miss Arias being at the scene during this situation, that the camera was left in a washer, completely intact, with the SD card with all the pictures on it.
Right. The important part that stood out for me of that was that it was deleted.
Okay, and you didn't find that the fact that the camera was strangely left in a washer, you didn't find that strange then?
Strange.
Yes, that a camera would be in a washer?
My understanding of the records, like I highlighted earlier, was that it had been through a cycle. That there was some evidence that it had been put through a cycle. So did I find that strange?
Well, let me ask you this. So you think that there's some evidence that the camera went through a cycle?
That was my understanding.
From reading the police reports?
I believe so. That was my understanding, that it was damaged or tried to be damaged in some way by being put through a cycle.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to ask you is the point that you find it important that there's cleanup in the bathroom, right?
Yes.
Okay, but yet you don't find it important as to someone's ability to organize or plan when they leave then behind the most important piece of evidence, which is the evidence that she was there. You don't find that important?
Yeah, Rule 702, most important. Yeah, 7.
Do you find it important
What part?
that she left the camera behind that has all the evidence of her being there? Did that in any way figure into your opinion with regard to this organization and planning afterwards?
Yes, the fact that it was deleted.
So just the fact that it was deleted, but the fact that she left it there at the scene was not important?
The fact that it was my understanding that it was put through a cycle.
I'm
was
asking.
important, yes, that it was left behind and put through a cycle.
Okay, so the fact that it was, I'm not talking about the cycle. The fact that the camera itself, with all the evidence on it and able to get by forensic people, that was not important to you.
No, it's important.
So you consider that then in this organization and planning, that all the evidence was left behind,
Yes, I would consider that part of organization and planning.
leaving out.
Yeah, to delete the content, putting it in through the washer in order to make it look accidental that it was deleted, and then leave the camera behind. That seems to indicate she had organizational skills still intact. Was it stupid? Yeah. But sometimes even intelligent people do stupid things, like stabby, stabby, shooty, shooty, and lying, lying.
Evidence behind for someone to find.
And then putting it through a cycle.
Leaving
And-
evidence, what I'm asking you, Dr. DeMarte, is, so then you agree with me that that leaving evidence behind at a scene, at a crime scene, you find that to be evidence of organization?
Yes, the way it was done, yes.
Okay, all right. Because when somebody leaves evidence of themselves being there at a crime scene, that's evidence of organization to you, right?
Because there was deleting that occurred.
Okay, all right. You talked about the pattern of memory getting worse instead of better. Do you remember that? On direct.
I talked about the pattern of memory getting better.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Getting better instead of worse or staying the same, right?
In typical traumatic memories, is that what you're referring to?
No, let me start over.
Okay.
Okay, when you were answering questions by Mr. Martinez,
Yes.
you talked about Jodi's memory, right?
Yes,
And when you talked about her memory, you said that it seemed to be getting worse rather than better. That she wasn't recalling any new memories. Instead, it seemed to be getting worse for you.
that's correct.
Okay. And you based that opinion on the fact that because you believe that she told Dr. Samuels that she got rid of the weapons. That's what you said, right?
Yes, that's what he had in his report.
Okay. But what he actually had in his report was that she threw the gun away, right? That's what she had. That's what he had.
That she threw the gun away
Got rid of the gun.
and then changed her clothing.
Right. Okay. So he didn't talk about weapons in plural, did he?
I'd have to reference his report to be specific about that.
Okay. And she doesn't have a specific memory as to where the knife went, right?
She told me that she had a vague memory.
The vague memory of putting it in a dishwasher, right?
That's correct.
But she also told you that she doesn't know if that's a real memory or if that's something that she's remembering from before, like some other time, right?
That's how she described it.
Okay. And to you, it was important that this information was told to Dr. Samuels, you think, before she spoke to you, right?
Yes,
And so in other words, you think that she had more information when she spoke to Dr. Samuels, and less information when she talked to you.
Yes,
Okay. And we've been over this, I think, ad nauseum, but you spent about 12 and a half hours with Miss Arias, right?
that's correct.
And you're aware, do you know how much time Dr. Samuels spent with her?
I know he went back and saw her several times. I don't know the exact number of hours.
Okay. Well, you know, he spent about 25 to 30 hours with her. Does that sound about right?
I just said that I don't know.
Okay. So you don't have any idea.
I know that he saw her several times. That's all I know.
All right. Well, you know that he saw her several times and he went to see her after you saw her, right?
The date on his report, where it says conclusion of the evaluation, was prior to when I saw her.
Okay. So you're not aware of the fact that he went to see her after that report to talk about new information that was received?
Foundation, new information.
Okay, can you answer?
The report that I had, that's where the information was already included in. When I did see that he added an addendum later on, but it was a separate piece of paper. What I'm referring to was the actual report where he put the conclusion date on there, which was prior to when I saw him.
Okay. So you're not talking about the addendum then?
No, I'm not talking about the addendum.
Okay. Because there was an addendum, you know that he went back to see her again, right?
Yes.
And you'd agree that he spent more time talking to Miss Arias than you did, right?
According to the hours that you just gave me, if those are accurate, then the answer would be yes.
All right. And so it's certainly conceivable, given the amount of time that he spent with her versus the time that you spent with her, she might have given him more information, right? She had is that right?
If they spent more hours together, then yes, he would have collected more information.
You also testified that you found it unbelievable that when Jodi is driving towards Hoover Dam and she realizes that she has blood on her hands. Do you remember talking about that?
I do remember talking about that.
Okay. And you said that you found it unbelievable that when she saw that she had blood on her hands, she knew something bad had happened, right?
No, that's not what I said.
Well, but she's told you that, right? That she knew something bad had happened.
That she had killed him.
Right. And knowing that something bad had happened, right?
That would fall under the category of something bad.
Okay. And that based on, you find it to be unbelievable that she would not know that she would make that statement that she thought she had killed him, right? You find that to be unbelievable.
Per her report that she had no memory of what happened, I find that unbelievable.
Okay. But also per her same report that she told you, her last memories were after she shot him, right?
Yes.
So she remembers shooting Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And she remembers him coming after her as she's shooting, right?
Yes.
And she remembers that after she shoots him, he falls on top of her, right?
Yes.
And she remembers that she had to roll away from him, right?
Yes.
And she remembers that she had to run down the hall.
Yes.
And that she remembers that she's running away from him.
Yes.
And she remembers the last thing that he tells her is, I'm going to fucking kill you, bitch. Right?
As he was running after her.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So given all the things that she does remember up until that point, it's not a huge leap to think that something bad had happened when blood is on her hands, right?
You're using different words now.
No, I'm just asking you, generally speaking. It's not a huge leap to assume that something bad happened when she sees blood on her hand.
I disagree.
So you think that that's not a logical leap then?
I agree that that's not a logical leap.
Okay. So all right. So it's not logical then to assume that something bad had happened when you know that you just shot somebody and you know he was coming after you and you know that you were terrified. And then hours later, you see blood on your hands.
You're using the word something bad that happened. And I'm referring to the fact that she said, I knew I killed him.
I know, but I'm not talking about that right now. I'm just asking you the simple question of whether or not it's a logical leap for someone to assume something bad happened after we have all these facts going on.
If you're
Approach.
Very much so. I agree with you, Ghosterly. This is not a good cross-examination. I see what she's trying to do, but this witness is too good. The facts are too bad, and there's not much she can do except try to confuse the situation. So, but the witness is just not falling for it. The whole idea with the photos, I'm not sure that really helped. Obviously she was panicking, otherwise she wouldn't have left the photos behind, right? Or she's dumb.
Yeah, I mean, or the panic was when, this is a lot of blood. He didn't die immediately like they portray in the movies.
I do agree somewhat. I think it could have been asked better, right? So the defense is saying you considered the fact that she cleaned up the scene. There's water on the floor and she tried to clean up the scene. You considered that, but you didn't consider the fact that she left the camera behind, deleted photos, and put it in the washing machine. That you didn't take into consideration, but you took into consideration the floor. It just, I get that, but it doesn't, it wasn't asked right, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, by the way, Ghostry asks an important question. I have not seen Sal being here saying he can save Jodi. Has Sal given up?
Sal's actually been in my chat. He's been over in my chat today. I've seen him a few times. He's not saying he's going to save her, but definitely that she's worth saving.
Okay.
I'm not sure he feels confident in his own abilities these days.
Well, you still have to acknowledge the fact that Jodi is a multimillionaire, and if Sal can get to her, then sure. He might not be able to save her, but he can save her money.
That's right. He's talking about, ooh, she has low self-esteem earlier in chat. He's been around. I don't know where he's at now.
May I continue?
All right, Dr. DeMarte, I want to make sure that I'm clear with this question, okay? All right. So I'm not speaking about anything that Miss Arias told you, okay? Do you understand that?
So it's hypothetical?
Sure, let's do it as a hypothetical if that helps, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So for someone to look down at their hands and see blood on them, okay? Knowing that just before that, they were in a situation where they had to shoot somebody, that somebody was coming after them, and that somebody was threatening their life, okay? In that situation, it's not a huge leap, is it, for that person to say something bad might have happened?
Sure, looking at that broad category that's not related to this case, yes, I could see that.
So you can
That it would
agree with me
not-
on that
That it
then?
wouldn't be a broad leap to see blood and say something bad happened.
Okay, so you can agree with me on that then, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's take it one step further. Knowing that Miss Arias was just in a situation where she had to shoot Mr. Alexander, where he fell on top of her, where he came after her, where she was terrified and she was fearful for her own life. And then seeing blood on her hands, understanding that it's not her blood. You think that that's not really a huge leap, is it, to think that she might have killed him?
Just not really know it's own blood.
Sustained.
Whether it's her own blood or not, it's not a huge leap, is it, to say that I might have killed him, knowing that everything that just happened, everything that she remembers about just happening?
As I've stated before, it is a huge leap.
Okay, and that's a huge leap for you. That's what your personal opinion, isn't it?
That is my opinion.
Okay, it's your personal opinion, right?
It's my opinion as a psychologist.
So I understand it's your opinion as a psychologist, but it's an opinion that you yourself made, right?
I'm a psychologist and I made that opinion based on my knowledge of memory and how memory works.
Okay, and so because it's you as a person making this opinion based on even being a psychologist, it's still a subjective opinion, isn't it?
And when you use the word subjective, what do you mean by that?
I mean that it's an opinion based on what your own thoughts are and your own experiences.
And on my education and understanding of how memory works.
So you agree with me then that it's subjective?
I would say it's based on my understanding of how memory works.
So it's not subjective? Are you saying it's objective?
I think that's an objective piece of data that was given to me.
I'm not
Well,
talking
she
about the
made a
data. I'm
subjective
talking about
opinion
your
based on
opinion
it.
as to whether or not this is a huge leap or not. You can't agree with me that that's subjective?
I think there's enough objective data to suggest that that couldn't have happened.
I'm not talking about the data. I'm talking about your opinion alone. When we talk about your opinion, can you not agree with me that that's a subjective opinion?
Yes, it's my opinion based on information that I know about memory.
Yes, so it's subjective then.
If those are the words that you're using, then yes.
Yes, you agree.
Yes, those are the words that you're using.
Okay, well, I know I'm using them, but I'm asking you if you're agreeing with me.
It sounds like that's what you believe the definition to be. So yes,
Then you agree with me.
yes.
Okay.
Wow, she got her there. Oh, wow. She got her there. I didn't think that was going to work, but wow. So good afternoon, genitals. I'm not sure the point this lawyer is trying to make here. I think she was trying to get the witness to say that my opinions about Jodi are personal opinions that are subjective. They're not objective. She finally kind of sort of got her to say it. I would just be like,
yeah,
sit down.
Yeah.
I would just sit down.
But at the same time, the Janeen DeMarte changed it to, well, to almost as if, well, you're still wrong about the definition, but sure, for the sake of argument and to your flawed opinion about the meaning of the word, okay, I can agree with you.
Yeah. Servant of God says I wouldn't agree. I mean, there's a better way to answer that. I think she qualified her answer by, if you're asking me to confirm your understanding, then yes. But I'm surprised she even said yes. I would have just stuck with, no, your understanding is wrong. A very God, I can't remember her name. Never mind. That really didn't go well at all. Yeah, no, it did not. I'd just sit down at this point and be done.
You talked about another report from Dr. Karp,
Yes,
and you're aware in that report, Dr. Karp conducted several tests with Miss Arias, right?
yes,
And those tests included the TSI,
yes,
and that's the trauma symptom inventory,
correct.
and that's the test that measures trauma, right?
And general emotional distress.
Okay. And she also did the Beck depression inventory.
Yes,
And what is that?
it's a self-report measure that measures depression.
Okay. And another inventory taken from pattern changing for abused women.
Yes,
Okay. And do you know what that is?
I believe that was a measure of background exposure to violence.
Okay. And the WALMYR assessment scales, the partner abuse scale. Do you know what that is?
Yes,
What's that?
it's again a self-report measure of exposure to domestic violence.
Okay. And there's two of those, right? One for physical and one for non-physical abuse.
That's correct.
Okay. And both of those were given, right?
That's correct.
And when you say self-report, that means that there are a bunch of questions in these reports, right?
Yes,
And the person is meant to answer these questions.
yes,
And when these questions are posed, they're posed in a way that whether or not the person believes it to be abuse, they're just simply asked factual questions, factual situations, right?
what person were you referring to?
The person who's answering these questions.
So ask that question again.
Okay, so when the assessment scales, the partner abuse scales, when those tools are used, they're asking the person who's using it, and let's just talk about Jodi. When they're asking Jodi, they're just questions that she's answering, right?
She's answering questions.
Okay, and those questions are asking her about specific situations, right?
Yes,
And then the idea is that of these assessments is that from seeing those answers to these assessments, the psychologist makes a decision as to whether or not there is abuse, right?
yes,
It's not Miss Arias who's making that determination, right?
correct. It's based on her response.
Right. And you didn't give any of these assessments, right?
That's correct.
And during this time, you would agree that these assessments are very detailed questions?
Yes,
And in these questions, they're not asking Miss Arias whether or not she believes the situations to be abusive, right? They're just asking her for factual situations.
correct.
And when you spoke to Miss Arias, you talked to her, you specifically asked her what she thought was abusive, right?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you asked her about any physical incidents, right?
Yes,
Okay. And when you talk about that, you were specifically referencing what she thought to be physically abusive, right?
and I gave some examples to help her understand it.
Okay. But that was your direct questions to her, right?
What was?
The question, you're specifically asking her, tell me what you believe to be abusive. Tell me what he did that you think is abusive, right?
Yes,
And I think yesterday we established that you agree that battered women often minimize details, don't they?
they do.
Is that a symptom of it?
Or she's just lying. Have you considered that, attorney? What I don't remember her name.
She's
Now,
got a job
ultimately, you
to
said
do,
your
Nick.
opinion
Leave
was
her alone.
that Miss Arias has borderline personality disorder.
Correct.
And borderline personality disorder is something that if you're going to diagnose that, you need to see evidence of that from a very young age, right?
You need to see evidence of that sometime before the age of 18.
Okay. And so would it be enough if you see the evidence at age 17 and nothing before that?
You usually see a pattern, as I described before, the pattern of personality tends to start developing relatively young, and you may see an escalation of those symptoms over time.
Okay, so when you say relatively young, what do you mean?
Again, personality starts developing in the toddler years and starts to become more solidified as they get older.
Okay. And so when you're looking for patterns with relation to borderline personality, you would expect to see them, you said sometime before 18, but really wouldn't you expect to see them long before 18?
Usually start seeing, at the point when they start becoming maladaptive is older than that, usually start to see it more in their teenage years.
Okay. And what you want to see is you want to see a pattern of it, right? Not just one incident.
That's correct.
And you'd agree that if the person has suffered from a trauma, that when you look at that trauma, you need to see the evidence of any type of borderline traits before the trauma, right?
When you're talking about trauma in adulthood, you're talking about trauma in childhood.
I'm talking, let's say trauma in adult.
Okay.
So, and let's speak about Miss Arias. So we know, let's assume for a second with me that she had a traumatic event on June 4th, okay?
Okay.
And assume for me that that was traumatic for her, okay?
Okay.
And assume for me that the abusive, longstanding abusive and emotional abuse that she suffered was traumatic for her as well, okay?
Okay.
And so if a person who you are diagnosing with borderline personality has a traumatic event or traumatic events, you want to see evidence of borderline prior to the traumatic event.
That would be correct.
And that's what the DSM-4 tells you, doesn't it?
Yes.
See, the defense is saying that it exists.
And in fact, you want to see clear evidence of this pattern before any traumatic events.
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right, so on direct, you talked about the different criteria for borderline, right?
Yes.
And the first criteria is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, right?
Yes.
And there is a word in there, frantic, right?
Yes.
So it's not just somebody who doesn't want to break up with their boyfriend. There's a lot more than that, right? When we're talking frantic.
Yes.
And you talked about that if there's a strong desire to be attached to people, right?
Yes.
And as evidence for you, for borderline personality, for Jodi, you find the fact that she moved to Mesa after she and Mr. Alexander broke up. You find that to be evidence.
One piece of evidence.
Okay. A data point, right?
Yes.
And so, but you're aware that she moved to Mesa. Well, first of all, you're aware that this happens in July of 2007, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you talk about this happening after she and Mr. Alexander broke up, right?
Yes.
But you're aware that they never actually stopped talking to each other, right?
They did not stop talking to each other.
And in fact, Mr. Alexander continued his relationship with her after she broke up with him. You know this, right?
Continued a sexual relationship with her.
Well, he continued talking to her too, didn't he?
Yes, he continued talking to her.
And he continued saying really nice things to her, didn't he?
He sometimes did say nice things to her, yes.
Yes. And he continued inviting her over his house.
I saw a couple instances where he invited her, yes.
Well, you know that they traveled together just a few months after she moved to Mesa, right?
I'm aware that they did travel together.
Okay. And you talk about her overstepping boundaries because she checked his text messages,
Yes.
right? And she told you that she did that because she believed he was cheating on her, right?
Yes.
And in fact, she confirmed that by looking at his text messages.
Yes.
And then you also think that that she looked at his Facebook as well.
Numerous times.
Okay. And you're aware that they actually traded passwords, right?
Well, that's what I saw that she had said in her diary, and that was in opposition to a conversation that they had in some written form. I don't know if it was instant messaging or text.
Well, this conversation that you're referring to, when did it happen?
I believe that conversation was in May.
Right. So after she moved away from him, right?
That would be the time frame after.
Right. And the conversation that you're referring to is when they both stopped, that they both changed their password, so neither one of them can look at each other's Facebooks anymore,
Lou,
right? Or MySpace.
Is the expert's testimony
I
credible?
don't know
in your
when that
opinion?
happened, but what I do know is that he indicated that she continued to look at his Facebook account without his authorization.
And you think that, and that's coming directly from Mr. Alexander's mouth?
Yes. Well, not directly from his mouth. It's coming from written forms.
Written form, but something that he's supposedly typing, right?
Not supposedly. I saw it. Yes.
Okay. Well, you weren't there when he typed it, is what I'm saying.
Yes, I was not there.
Okay. And so all of these things that you talk about with regard to the first criteria all have to do with Mr. Alexander, don't they?
No, there's other instances.
Well, not that you gave us on direct, right? The things that you talked about on direct, we're talking about just Mr. Alexander, the timeline when she was dating him or in a relationship with him.
I'd be happy to provide other examples if you'd like me to.
No, I'm not asking you for that. I'm asking you about when on direct, when the prosecutor was asking you for examples of why you believe she fit into the first criteria, the only examples that you gave us all had to do with Mr. Alexander, right?
I don't recall exactly if that's all the examples I gave because I have several other
Can you
examples.
pause it real quick?
Okay, so you don't remember that the only examples you gave?
Totally not a Russian bot. Are you wondering if Jodi has a manifesto? Because she does, because Nick and I read over it.
Yeah. A manifesto she wrote when she still claimed ninjas did it.
Yes.
Oh, it's...
I got to get all my Jodi videos back up. I'm just going to load them like one after the other because oh, no, the witness. Oh, if the witness has a manifesto? Oh, because they look alike. I get it now.
Yeah.
Okay, but I figured I'd bring it up anyways because there is a manifesto of Jodi, and Nick and I, over like 3 days, we read through it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
I think Farrell joined you one day, and then I did the other two.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yes, it was stupid AF. Yes, it was.
Had to do with Mr. Alexander?
It sounds like that's the case if that's what you're telling me, but that's not what I don't remember if that's the case. I have
Okay.
numerous other examples if you'd like me to give them to you.
No, I just want to talk about what you talked to the prosecutor about.
Okay.
The second one The second one is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, right?
Yes.
Well, and actually, I'm sorry. Let me go back to the efforts to avoid real and imagined abandonment for a second. You understand that Miss Arias actually moved out of her home when she was a teenager, right? She left her parents
Yes.
and she stayed with a boyfriend at the time.
Yes.
You know that she had several jobs during that time, right? She, as a teenager into her adulthood, she was always working, wasn't she?
At many different jobs. Yes.
Okay. Well, how many different jobs when you say many?
She had told me that she had worked for several years in her father's restaurant, and that
Yeah.
she had also had it at a minimum of 10 different restaurant jobs.
She
And
told you that she had 10 different
That she
restaurant
had,
jobs?
yes, I believe that's the case. I can reference my notes if that would be helpful.
Sure, if you have them.
Sure. This is my whole notes that have been disclosed already.
Okay.
Just here.
You want me to mark the whole thing or did you want to pull it out?
Sure, you can mark the whole thing and then I can have that back.
The expert's getting a bit feisty. I agree.
Yeah.
Minimum, yes. I was correct in what I said.
That she told you 10 jobs.
At a minimum, yes.
Okay. And
Amongst many other jobs.
so she had 10 restaurant jobs and more than that as well?
10, I'm referring to restaurant jobs, yes.
Okay. And
And more as well, of different types of jobs.
different types of jobs besides restaurant jobs?
That's correct.
What were these?
She indicated that one was being a spa receptionist.
Okay.
She also indicated that at one point she was a caretaker, I believe, of a child.
Okay. When was that?
Let me see if I can find that in my
Sure.
notes.
And can you tell us what the number is? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you. On the green tag for your notes? On the back.
630,
Okay. So you're referring to exhibit 630.
November 2007 to January of 2008. She was a caretaker for a young boy.
Okay. All right. So for a year, she was a caretaker for this little boy?
It doesn't appear that that's a year.
What'd you say, 2000?
November 2007 to January of 2008.
Oh, okay. All right. So when you talk about this effort of frantic effort to avoid real or imagined abandonment, you talk about it as being terrifying to be separated, right?
Yes.
Okay. And all right. And the second criteria you have is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, right?
Correct.
And you characterize that as a strong tendency to go from boyfriend to boyfriend, right? For Miss Arias.
I characterize that. Are you talking about the symptom in general or how it specifically applies to her?
How it applies to her.
That was one example.
Okay, so the fact that she had 4 boyfriends from the time that she was 14 up until now, that you characterize as going from boyfriend to boyfriend?
That was also coming from her childhood friend who also made that exact same comment. So that in combination to having these boyfriends back to back.
Her childhood friend who made a comment that she went from boyfriend to boyfriend?
Yes.
Okay, and her childhood friend isn't a psychologist like you, right?
No, I was just highlighting another data point.
Okay, so this is something you're talking in a psychological, clinical evaluation type way, right?
Right.
Okay, and so you, as a psychologist, consider her going from boyfriend to boyfriend because she had 4 boyfriends from the time she was 14.
Back to back.
Back to back.
Mhm.
Okay. So the fact that she was with, let's say, Mr. Brewer for a total of 4 years, doesn't characterize any stability for you.
Oh, that shows stability.
Okay. And the fact that she was with Mr. McCartney for 2 years, that would show stability as well, right?
That shows stability.
And the third one you talk about, the third criteria being identity disturbance, right?
Yes.
And that's markedly and persistently unstable self-image, right?
Self-concept, yes. Self-image.
Self-image. Okay. And for that, your evidence was the fact that she joined the Mormon church quickly, right?
That was one.
That was one of your data points that you used.
Yes.
And you're aware that when she joined the Mormon church, it was just 2 months after she met Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
So again, we're talking about a time period of Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
And you're aware that after she met Mr. Alexander, within a week, he was sending Mormon missionaries to her house, right?
No.
Oh, you didn't know that?
No.
Oh, okay. And then did you not know that these Mormon missionaries came to her house once a week until she converted?
No.
You weren't aware of that?
No.
You didn't get that in your 12 hours?
I didn't get that in my 12 hours.
Okay. And the fifth one you talked about as recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, right?
Correct.
And that also includes self-mutilating behavior.
Correct.
All right, and there's no self-mutilating behavior, right?
None that I'm aware of.
And you know of no actual threats she ever made to anybody to commit suicide, right? Prior to this traumatic event? But let's say prior to June 4th.
You need a second to think about that.
Sure.
When you say actual threats, there was, I would consider this a threat. There were comments in her diary.
And at that time, those comments in her diary, she didn't actually give a plan that she was going to kill herself, right?
A specific plan, no.
Okay, so what she was actually, any references to her diary prior to this, to meeting Mr. Alexander, we're talking about that she had low self-image, right? That it wasn't worth her being alive, something to that effect.
You're attaching low self-image with suicide. I wouldn't do that. I would say that there were numerous comments beginning as early as 1995 of repeated suicidal mention of suicide and desire to commit suicide.
Okay, but that's my question though. When you're talking about the suicide, she's not giving an actual plan in her journal, right? She's not saying, I'm gonna go home and take 30 pills so I can die tomorrow.
That's right. I didn't see a specific plan in there.
Okay, so there was never a plan that you saw, right? In her journal, prior to any traumatic event.
Prior traumatic event.
Well, prior to meeting Mr.
Asked
Alexander.
and answered.
Okay. I don't believe I saw a specific plan.
Okay, and the other thing about this suicide ideation is that you never saw any actual threats. We were talking about that. Now, you would consider it a threat because she writes it down in her own journal, right?
A threat?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't use the word threat. I would say that it's an indication that she's idealizing and thinking about suicide behavior, which is what that symptom captures.
Okay, and this symptom is actually meant to have actual threats of suicide, right? That's one of the things that it lists in the DSM.
That's one in addition to idealizing and thinking about it.
Okay, so now do you agree with me that you never saw any threats of her actually committing suicide prior to meeting Mr. Alexander?
If you're using the word threat and planning as though they're the same thing. I use them differently.
I'm not using planning, I'm talking about threat.
So threat would be writing it down and indicating that there's some thought about it.
Okay, and so you never saw, so for you that means threat.
Yes.
Okay, and she never had this threat made to anyone else that you know of, right? It was only in her own journal.
No, that's not correct.
So prior to meeting Mr. Alexander, that she threatened to commit suicide to somebody else.
Her friend Xenia indicated that she had mentioned suicide to her.
Oh, her friend from 5th grade, right?
They met young and she indicated that they sporadically kept in contact.
Okay, and again, any reference to that wasn't an actual plan, was it?
I don't know the details of that. I know she had just mentioned that she had been thinking about suicide.
Okay, so you don't know the details, but not knowing the details didn't stop you from using it as a data point, right?
It is a data point because as you can read there in the DSM, it indicates that suicidal ideation is what's captured under that symptom.
What I'm asking you is that then you didn't go and ask to interview this Dana person, right? To ask her specifically what she meant by any comments about suicide.
No, because it didn't matter. There was the comment of suicide, which again is captured under that symptom.
Okay, so just the comment of suicide, any comment of suicide. So anytime anybody says something like, I'm going to commit suicide, or I wish I weren't here, that to you falls under this criteria?
No, that's not what I said. What I'm saying is I look for a pattern of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And in this situation, we're talking about suicide. So I'm looking for a pattern of suicidal ideation, and that's what matters.
Well, isn't it?
My asshole cat just threw down a glass down the stairs.
Oh, good times.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure how he got it there or how he got it down there.
I got a pocket watch. I don't know where the cat got it from, but it was on the floor next to my desk. Not a clue. I have no idea. I picked it up. I have no idea where the cat got it from. But the cats will find stuff.
Yeah. So I have some cleaning up to do after this stream.
It's a good time. I'm going to jump off in a few minutes, everybody, because I am a judge over on Baker's mock trial today at 2:00. So I'm going to jump off a little early and get ready for that. And I've been muted because I've been printing a bunch of material for this mock trial, which is going to be a good time.
Yeah. And I'm going to redirect you after the stream to Broken Baker. Will you also do that, Dave? Oh,
no, I can't. I can't redirect. No, you guys are just going to have to go over to Nick's for a minute so you can get redirected over there.
It's true that this pattern that you speak of is really just comments by a teenager who talks about being depressed, right?
No.
So you don't count these as depressed comments?
You're meshing two different things together again, that suicide specifically has to do with depression. Suicidal behavior can be seen in a number of different disorders as evidenced with Ms. Arias as borderline personality disorder.
What I'm asking you is that when somebody talks about wishing they weren't here anymore or that their life isn't worth living, you don't see that as evidence of depression either?
I'm saying that yes, you can see that in depression amongst other disorders.
All right. How many comments is it that you saw?
Yes.
And you're referring to just her journals then, right? Besides the Zana person, you're referring to just her journals?
And her parents indicated the same.
And how many comments is it that you're counting here?
I didn't count them.
Okay, so more than one?
Oh, yes.
Okay, more than 10?
Are we talking back since 1995?
Yes.
I don't think that I can't give a specific number. I think it would be misleading to give a specific number.
So you just know more than one?
Definitely more than one, several, for it to be a pattern. I would never consider something a pattern if I just saw it one time.
Okay, so several then.
Yes.
All right, several from 1995.
Yes.
You talked about the sixth one, the affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood, right?
Correct.
And that you can see what the DSM talks about is irritability or anxiety.
Those are two things that are listed there.
Okay, and anxiety usually lasting a few hours. Right?
If you'd like for me to read it verbatim with you, I can do that also. Would you like me to pull that out?
No, I'm reading it.
Okay.
I'm just asking, do you know this by memory or no?
I know most of it by memory, but I wouldn't say that I have it memorized verbatim.
Okay, well, you'd agree that the affective instability talks about anxiety that usually lasts a few hours and only rarely more than a few days, right?
Right.
Okay. And for this, you're saying one of the examples that you used was that in her journals, right? In her journal entries, you would see that she would appear happy on one side of her journal, and on the same day or the next day even, she would be sad, right?
That was one data point.
Okay. And you're aware that you talked about the law of attraction, right? On direct a
I
little
said
bit.
that I was aware of it.
Okay. And you were aware, and you can see evidence that Jodi really paid a lot of attention to the law of attraction in her journals, right?
Yes.
And this was specific to 2006 and on, right?
I don't know the specific date, but I did see it in there numerous times.
Okay. And the law of attraction, when she would speak of it, she would speak very positively, right? About her life and all the things that she was thankful for.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a very matriarchal
And then she would talk,
case.
What?
I said this is a very matriarchal case. We've got the female judge, the female expert, the female defendant, the female defense attorney, and the man trying to put them away.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at all the patriarchy in this picture.
Yes. The law of attraction. Oh, the law of attraction, that
Oh God.
all this nonsense in the early 2000s that was going around.
sometimes then that when she would speak negatively, she would speak about things about Mr. Alexander, right?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay, and she would talk about how Mr. Alexander, that it was upsetting to her that he would have harsh and critical words for her, right?
I believe I saw one comment related to that.
Okay, and that created a sad type mood in her journal, didn't it? When she would talk about these things?
I don't know that that was specifically related to him. No.
You don't know if the harsh critical words were related to Mr. Alexander?
I don't know the exact journal entry you're referring to. Would you like to show that to me?
No, I'm asking you, do you not remember it? You just told me you did.
No, what I said is that I remember in her journal seeing the change from happy to sad.
Okay,
I don't know if it was specifically related to anything to do with Mr. Alexander.
but you don't have any specific examples of those dates in her journal, right?
I don't have those. No.
Okay. And the chronic feelings of emptiness. What does that mean for the DSM?
It's described as a person having a sense of just being empty inside, that there's nothing inside of them.
You're using empty twice. So tell me nothing inside. What does that mean? Is that depression? Describe it for us.
The feeling of just being empty. It's a common descriptor that we see in patients who have that sense, that they say inside, I just feel like I don't have anything there.
Okay. And you're saying that she told you this.
She did.
And you, of course, spoke to her after she's been charged with murder, right?
Yes.
And you, of course, spoke to her after she had to kill Mr. Alexander, right?
Confusion, had to kill. I got you.
And they are approaching.
Her physical fights to you. She told you this.
She did.
And
Yes.
you, of course, spoke to her after crime, right? So when you spoke to Miss Arias, you spoke to her after she has already been charged with a crime, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other one that you have is inappropriate,
Yeah.
intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, right?
Yes.
And in the DSM, it says, as an example, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, recurrent physical fights, right?
Right.
You don't have any evidence of recurrent physical fights, do you?
No, not recurrent physical fights, just the time that she had kicked her mom.
Okay. I'm asking you whether or not you have any evidence of constant anger.
In terms,
She kicked her mom? And she's still alive? I can
Apparently.
guarantee you, if I had kicked my mother, my father would have thrown me into the lake several times until I didn't get up anymore. I mean, no. I was disrespectful to my mother once. After a drunken spree when I was 14, he came to collect what was remaining.
Drunken spree at 14. Let's skip over the headline here.
Yeah, I had an interesting teen years, and then he collected.
Europe's a different place.
He collected my drunk self from whatever place I was at. On the way home, I said something really bad about my mother, and then I woke up at home, and I never did that again.
Nice. I'm going to take this opportunity to jump off and go make sure everything's squared away for Baker's thing.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for hanging out. Keep hanging out. I did post a link to Baker's stream that's starting right after this, so that you can go over there. But otherwise, hang out, enjoy the rest of the Jodi show, and I'll see you guys all in a little bit.
Yep. Thank you for being here.
Take care, Nick.
Yep. See ya. Bye. And I'm going to redirect to Baker's stream, but I'm also going to post it at the top of the chat. There. And by the way, Dave, I won. I have more likes and I have more super chats. All right. Let's get back to the trial.
anger, yes.
Okay. And you get that evidence from where?
Her family members who had indicated that this is something that they had seen in her throughout most of her life.
Most of her life?
Yes.
Okay, but you're referring to, and I know you just wanted to throw out there the when she kicked her mom. That's something that happened when she was a teenager, right?
She was younger, yes.
Yes, and that's something that happened when she was arguing with her mom, right?
I believe so.
And you know that she was...
I need to retract that.
Okay, you don't know when it happened?
No, that there was, if I remember correctly, there was an indication that her mother had made a kind, neutral comment to her, and the response was negative.
Okay, that's what your information is?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so then I guess, are you aware that the fact that the time when Miss Arias was a teenager, that her mother would argue with her back, right? Do you know this?
Would what?
Her mother would argue with her.
Yes, she indicated that there was a lot of arguing.
Okay, and that her mother would hit her.
Yes, that's what she reported to me.
But the only thing that you want to take into account is that Miss Arias hit her back.
And
right?
that's not the only thing I want to take into account.
Well, you're using that as a data point, right?
That she hit her, yes, for that symptom, yes.
And you're using that as a data point for inappropriate intense anger.
As one data point, yes.
Okay. And also it talks about frequent displays of temper. You don't have that, do you?
Do I have that?
You don't have that as a data point for Jodi, frequent displays of temper?
Yes, that people would describe her as being irritable and upset.
Okay. And they also described her as being very happy, don't they?
Yes, other people do describe her as that.
And being very pleasant and kind.
Yes.
And they describe her as being very caring.
Yes, some people do.
Yeah.
So the people are describing her as either or, which kind of tends to some kind of borderline or bipolar. So either or, yeah.
Yes, and describe her as being very loving.
Some people did describe her as that.
And
I don't think Jodi's happy with
I believe for this criteria, you wanted to use an email from Miss Arias to Mr. Alexander, right? On February 14th?
Yes.
And in this email, she says she's talking to Mr. Alexander, right? Through email, right?
Yes.
And I'm showing you exhibit number 623. And she writes to Travis that she's sorry that the last few days have been frustrating for him, right?
Yes.
And she wishes that she can give him more consolation.
Yes.
And she says that she was at a loss for words, right?
Yes.
and that she's a little bit intimidated, not necessarily because of his anger, but she wasn't sure how he would react to her trying to comfort him, right?
Yes.
So she's talking about how she's trying to comfort him.
Yes, she was.
And she says that she compares it to her own experiences, that sometimes she doesn't want to hear it, and she just wants to yell and scream and vent, right?
Yes.
And then she puts in quote in parentheses, yes, I do, on very rare occasions, right?
Yes.
And then she wants to go, and then she talks about going through the motions until the situation plays itself out. Right?
I'm still reading.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And she talks about needing comforting sometimes.
Yes.
And she talks about how her heart filled with compassion for Travis.
Yes, she did.
Okay. And when you were talking to the prosecutor about this email, you didn't go through any of this part, right?
I had read that.
Not with the prosecutor on direct, right? You didn't tell the jury about it.
Correct. We read the second paragraph.
Okay. And it's clear from the first paragraph that apparently there was something going on prior to February 14th between that Mr. Alexander was upset about, right?
Yes.
Because she's talking about his anger.
About him being frustrated.
Right. And his anger too, right? Because of how angry you were.
Yes.
And then she goes on to talk about.
I agree. Lou Hillier Psych says, I don't think Jodi regrets killing Travis at all. She regrets getting caught, perhaps. Yeah, I think she regrets calling the cops. Definitely calling the cops. Because without her inserting herself that much into the investigation, it would have been harder for them to actually connect her. Harder, not impossible, but it would have been harder. But once she started to insert herself, yeah.
To kind of pump him up, doesn't she? When she says that after she hung up with him, that she continued to cry for a few minutes. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And so she's talking about how she was crying after she hangs up with Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
And that she was feeling miserable and hopeless. And then suddenly she thought of him and she knew that she stopped crying and she began to feel wonderful, right?
Is that what the rest of that says?
Yes. Do you need to read it? Go ahead.
I see the part that you're referencing now.
And she talks about how lucky she is to have him in her life, right?
Yes.
And so saying this to somebody, it would make them feel good, wouldn't it?
They're kind words.
Yeah. And so she's saying kind words to him, isn't she?
Yes.
And she talks about the future and how talking about she's specifically referencing today's lesson has been difficult and was not fun, but the general idea is that once we learn the lessons, that we don't repeat them anymore, right? She's talking in a very positive manner with him, isn't she?
Yes.
And that she hopes that he feels better and to remember that no matter how ugly it gets, that she's just a phone call away, right?
Yes.
When you went through this email with the prosecutor on direct, you didn't tell the jury any of the other kind words that Ms. Arias had to say, right?
Right.
And knowing that you were going to use this email as a data point in your diagnosis to borderline, you didn't talk to Jodi about it, right?
Did I talk to her about
the email?
No.
You never asked her what she specifically meant when she talks. What the part that you use is that she says that she's never beaten anybody up, but her anger, she's kicked holes in walls and kicked down doors and smashed windows, right?
Right.
And knowing that you were going to use this as a data point, as you say, you never talked to her about it, right?
I don't believe I'd read it at that point.
Okay, so you never went back and talked to her about it?
No, I didn't go back.
You never asked to clarify, well, what did you mean by this, Jodi? How often did this happen? You didn't ask her those questions.
No.
And you didn't ask her then, so you have no idea if what she says in this paragraph is true or not, right?
Just like with everything else, it's just another data point.
Okay, but it's a data point that you used to form a criteria or an opinion about borderline personality, right?
Not independently.
You used it to form one of the things to form your opinion about borderline personality, right?
As one of the pieces of information, yes, I did.
All right, you conducted the MMPI, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us what that is?
It's a self-report measure. There's a 567 questions, true or false. It captures personality traits and general psychopathology.
And this was a test that you gave, right?
Yes.
And in this test, you said you computer scored it?
Yes.
And you said you did it twice? Did I hear you say that or no?
The computer makes you do it twice.
Okay, so that's acceptable then to score the MMPI twice because the computer makes you do it?
It's part of the protocol when you're entering it.
Okay, so and which computer scoring company did you use?
This is with, I believe it's Pearson.
Pearson, okay.
I'd have to double check on that.
All right, and do you
It's called
have,
QLocal.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, it's called QLocal is the name of it.
Okay, and do you have your, the computer, when you put it into the computer and it scores it, it spits you out something like graphs and charts, things like that, right?
Yes,
Do you-
T-scores.
And do you have that with you?
I do.
Can you take those out, please?
Sure.
And I'm looking for all the scales. Because you said you did all of the scales, right? Not just the validity and clinical.
Right. So you're not asking for the raw data, you're asking for the score report?
No, right, I don't want the raw data.
And we will start promptly at that time. Please remember the admonition. Council, please approach.
Go subscribe to Vielhammer Media.
Meaning of the words.
Yes,
And so you just want to look at the words and use that as a data point, right?
yes,
And in looking at the words, and you basically get different data points from all over then, right?
yes,
That you pulled together, right?
yes,
Okay. And you're familiar with an string of emails that went back and forth between Mr. Alexander and Mr. and Mrs. Hughes?
yes,
And you know in this email then that at one point, Mr. Alexander, he's talking very highly of Miss Arias, isn't he?
yes.
And how much he really how much he really is into her, right?
That he was interested in her, yes.
Right, and that he adores her.
I don't recall those exact words. If you want to show me, I'm happy to look at it.
I'm not speaking in exact words, but the
Oh.
context of the email itself, he's very fond of her, isn't he?
He felt fondly of her, yes.
And he actually, in his own words, talks about that everybody can agree that they don't get more honest than Jodi, right?
I don't know that specifically, but again, I'd be happy to look at
Sure.
the email you're referring to.
May I approach? May. Exhibit 580 at the top of the page.
The part that's underlined, yes.
Yes, okay. And so he's talking then about the fact that they don't come more honest than Jodi, right?
Yes, that's what he said.
And that's something that is in written word,
Yes,
something that you don't want to go behind the meaning of, right? And you'll use that as a data point.
yes,
And you'll also use as data points the fact that Mr. Alexander was very fond of Miss Arias
yes.
and that he speaks very highly of her.
He did in that email.
And that he worries that the things that Mr. and Mrs. Hughes said to her was upsetting for Jodi, right?
Yes,
And when we go down the road to May 26th of 2008, you're familiar with instant messaging, right? Instant messaging between Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias?
there were several different ones. Which one are you referring to?
May 26th.
I don't know that exact date.
Okay, but you reviewed all these instant messages,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. And part of your review of the instant messages, you also reviewed the text messages.
Yes,
And in reviewing those things, you would agree that there were times when Mr. Alexander was quite upset with Jodi, right?
yes,
And he showed his anger with Jodi in his text messages, didn't he?
yes.
And he called her all kinds of names.
He called her names, yes,
And do you know what character assassination is?
yes.
And isn't that when names become actually so severe that it cuts down the person's own character, their own being?
I think that would be one definition, yes.
Okay. And you'd agree that a lot of these names that he was calling her was actually character assassination, wasn't it?
They were harsh names, yes.
And you wouldn't consider that to be okay.
No, that's not okay.
And in fact, that was abusive, wasn't it?
Abuse implies that it's a pattern of behavior. I would say that that behavior was certainly inappropriate and not healthy communication style.
Okay. But you don't consider it abusive.
I would say, again, the word abuse implies a pattern of behavior.
Well, we can talk about patterns in a second, but
Okay.
I'm talking about the word abuse. So you mean that unless it's repeated, this one particular incident wouldn't be considered abusive to you?
If we define abuse as a misuse of something,
No, Dr.
just a
Marte,
misuse, yes.
hold on a second. What I'm asking you is this one particular instant on May 26th, let's say, when Mr. Alexander, as you've agreed, was calling her names consistent
Yes.
with character assassination. You wouldn't agree that that's abusive?
I'm trying to explain to you what I mean.
Well, I'm asking, you're telling me that abuse is a pattern. So if it's just one instant, then is that not abuse?
I'd like to clarify, can I speak?
It's a yes or no question.
I don't believe I can answer in yes or no.
All right. So then that's a no.
No, I just said I can't answer you in yes or no.
All right. So then let's talk about patterns. You want to talk about patterns, and when we talk about abuse, you want to look for more than one instance of it, right? For you to characterize it as abuse.
I again would like to clarify that.
Do you want to see a pattern when you're looking at abuse?
I'd like to clarify that.
Clarify the fact that
What I've
whether or
been
not
trying-
you want to look at a pattern.
What I've been trying to clarify.
I'm moving on. So I'm just asking the question, do you want to see a pattern when you're looking for abuse?
It depends on how the word abuse is used. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. If it's implied that there's a pattern, no. If you're talking about the word abuse as being a misuse of something in one instance, then you can use the word abuse in a single incident, yes.
Okay. Did you clarify enough?
I did, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. So what I'm asking you is when you're looking at abuse in a relationship, do you look for patterns?
Yes,
Okay. And some of this abuse, you would agree that it can be psychological abuse, right?
yes,
And in fact, psychological abuse can be very damaging to a person, right?
it can be damaging.
And when we look at psychological abuse, you can look at the written word, right?
Yes,
And so on May 26th, when Mr. Alexander is calling Miss Arias a freaking whore, do you consider that particular word to be bad?
yes,
Do you consider it to be mean?
yes,
Do you consider it to be a word that that cuts her down?
yes,
Do you consider it to be mean when he talks about that he's never had to deal with a more solid form of evil? Is that mean?
The same of her.
those are not kind words.
So is that mean then?
Yes, I would put it in that category.
Okay. And when you talk about this conversation on May 26th, if you know that he has called her these types of names before this, let's talk about May 10th, or if he's called her names on April 8th or April 7th or March 30th, don't we start to see a pattern?
Are you talking about a hypothetical?
No, I'm asking, you've read through the text messages, right?
I have.
And you know that he calls her names, right?
Very rarely, yes.
You think very rarely he
Yes,
calls
I
her
would say
names?
that.
Okay. And so, how do you define rare?
I would say that it happened periodically. The pattern that I saw, that it was in response to him feeling like she was being intrusive or had crossed a boundary. And he was putting up very firm boundaries.
That's not what I'm asking you. I'm talking about rare. So rare is once or twice or more.
Are you asking me in this situation how many times it happened, or just
No,
the definition
I'm asking
of rare?
you said he rarely was abusive to her.
Yes.
So, and actually you said he rarely called her names, but are you going to use the word abusive with that or just calling names?
Calling names.
Okay. And so you consider all the numerous text messages that you've read and the numerous instant messages that you've read between the two of them, you would consider anytime he ever called her names, that was just happened rarely, right?
I would say that it happened infrequently. I think that's a better word.
Frequently?
Infrequently.
Oh, infrequently. Better than rarely.
That's probably a word that I would use. Yes.
And infrequently is what then?
It's not often. It's a handful of times.
Okay. And so a handful of times then becomes what, less relevant to you?
No, that's not less relevant.
So it's more relevant?
No, it's relevant.
It's relevant. Okay.
Yes.
And when you're talking about then this, do you think it's acceptable behavior for him to act like this?
I think anytime people speak to each other like that, that's not acceptable behavior.
Okay. So you'd agree that he was acting in an unacceptable way, right?
He had an unhealthy communication pattern.
Oh, he had an unhealthy, so
In those moments.
so he spoke enough times to her in this manner that you would say that it was an unhealthy communication pattern, right?
In those moments.
You just called it a pattern, right?
Yes, in those moments.
No, you just called it a pattern. You're talking about the unhealthy communication he had with her as a pattern, right?
In those exchanges. There were lengthy exchanges.
So
That's
now-
what I was referring to. The
so
pattern
now-
within the exchanges.
So now you want to call it a pattern when you're just talking about one conversation.
Within the exchanges, they were long exchanges.
Right, so these long exchanges, just one exchange is considered a pattern to you?
In the way that they were written between the two of them, they were long exchanges between the two of them. So within that exchange, yes, I would say that there was a pattern in that response.
Okay,
And here's the thing. I said we would redirect you all over to Broken Baker because he is going to do a mock trial jury selection. So, and Dave's not here, so it's just me saying thank you all for being here. We will continue this tomorrow. Thank you for being here, folks. See you later. I'm having a serial killer Saturday today in about 2 hours. Okay? Bye-bye.
The State of Arizona versus Jodi Arias, verdict, count 1. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn,